The year was 1878, a time when gas lamps flickered to life at dusk, and the clip-clop of horse-drawn carts was the loudest sound in many places. In a forgotten corner of England, nestled between rolling green hills and a meandering silver river, lay the village of Oakhaven. It wasn't a place you'd find on a grand map. It was too small, too peaceful for that. But for the people who called it home, Oakhaven was the whole wide world. Life in Oakhaven moved at the gentle pace of the seasons. Spring brought lambs skipping in the fields. Summer painted the meadows with wildflowers. Autumn turned the leaves to fiery gold. And winter wrapped everything in a soft white blanket. Everyone knew everyone in Oakhaven. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. Not just their names, but their favorite pies, their funniest jokes, and even the tune they hummed when they were happy. Mrs. Gable, with her rosy cheeks and a laugh like jingle bells, ran the bakery, her windows always smelling of warm bread and sweet pastries. Old Mr. Abernathy, who had a beard as white as snow, spent his days carving little wooden birds that seemed almost alive. Young Lily, no taller than a daisy, delivered milk from her family's cow, always with a shy smile. And Farmer McGregor, whose voice boomed like thunder, but whose heart was as soft as cotton, tended to his sheep. There were no strangers in Oakhaven. If a new face appeared, perhaps a traveling merchant or a distant cousin visiting, the whole village would know by lunchtime. Children played freely in the dusty lanes, their shouts of joy echoing between the neat rows of cottages. Doors were never locked, for what was there to fear when all around you were friends and family? The biggest excitements were the annual harvest festival and the occasional fair that passed through, bringing brightly colored ribbons and sugary treats. It was a simple life, a good life, full of shared stories and familiar faces. Oakhaven was a place where nothing much ever changed, and everyone liked it that way. In this quiet, friendly village of Oakhaven lived two children, Thomas and Emily, who were the very best of friends. Both were 8 years old, with knees often scraped from adventures and smiles that could brighten even the cloudiest day. Thomas had a mop of unruly brown hair that always seemed to stand on end, and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Emily had braids as golden as corn silk, and a giggle that sounded like tiny bells. They were inseparable, like two peas in a pod. If you saw Thomas, Emily was usually right behind him, or perhaps hiding just out of sight, waiting to surprise him. Their favorite game, above all others, was hide-and-seek. Oakhaven was the perfect playground for it. There were countless places to disappear. Behind Mrs. Gable's overflowing flour barrels, within the tall, rustling wheat fields at the edge of the village, or tucked away in Mr. Abernathy's workshop, smelling of sawdust and old wood. One sunny afternoon, with the smell of freshly cut grass in the air, Thomas was it. He pressed his face against the rough bark of the old oak tree in the village square, counting loudly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Emily, quick as a squirrel, darted behind the bakery, her golden braids bouncing. She knew just the spot, a small nook behind a stack of empty flour sacks, where she could become completely invisible. Thomas finished his count. Ready or not, here I come. He peered around, his eyes scanning every familiar corner. He checked the horse stable, poking his head in to see if she was nestled amongst the hay. He even looked under the big wooden cart by the blacksmith's shop. Emily, meanwhile, was giggling silently, her hand over her mouth, listening to his footsteps draw closer. The thrill of the game, The excitement of almost being found was the best feeling in the world. For Thomas and Emily, these simple games were the heart of their happy, carefree days in Oakhaven. The sun began to dip below the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Thomas and Emily, tired but happy from their games, were heading home, their laughter still echoing softly. Mrs. Gable was pulling her last batch of bread from the oven, and Mr. Abernathy was putting away his carving tools. It was a normal evening in Oakhaven, just like any other. But as darkness truly settled, a whisper started to spread through the village. "Look," someone murmured, pointing towards the fields. "What's that?" A fog was rolling in, but it wasn't the thick, damp mist that sometimes rose from the river on cool mornings. This fog was different. It didn't creep in grey and silent. Instead, it glowed with a soft, silvery light, almost like moonlight caught in a spiderweb. It shimmied and swirled, sparkling with tiny unseen flecks that danced in the air. It was beautiful, but also very strange. The villagers gathered at their doorways, watching the shimmery mist drift closer. Children, usually tucked into bed by now, pressed their faces against window panes, mesmerized by the glowing spectacle. "It looks like a cloud made of starlight," Emily whispered to Thomas, who stood beside her at his own window. Thomas nodded, his eyes wide. "It's like something out of a fairy tale." The fog didn't feel cold or wet. As it rolled into the village, it felt soft, almost warm, like a gentle breath. It moved slowly, gracefully, wrapping around the cottages, swirling past the old oak tree, and filling the lanes. The familiar shapes of houses and fences became blurry, bathed in the soft, magical glow. People watched it with a mix of wonder and a tiny bit of worry. No one in Oakhaven, not even the oldest residents, had ever seen a fog quite like this. It was truly unlike anything they had ever experienced, a shimmering mystery settling over their peaceful home. The shimmery fog had lingered through the night, a soft, silent blanket over Oakhaven. When the first rays of morning sun peeked over the hills, they found the village still bathed in a faint, silvery haze that slowly melted away. The birds began their morning songs, and the roosters crowed, signaling the start of a new day. But this day would be anything but normal. Thomas woke up with a stretch, but something felt different. His arms seemed longer, and his pajamas felt oddly tight. He went to scratch his head and found his hand was bigger, his fingers longer than he remembered. He rushed to the small mirror hanging on his wall. Staring back at him was not the 8-year-old boy he knew, but a much taller, lankier figure with broader shoulders and a face that looked like it belonged to a teenager, perhaps 13 or 14 years old. His once unruly brown hair was now longer and thicker. A gasp escaped his lips, a voice that was deeper than his usual childish squeak. Across the village, Emily was having a similar shock. She sat up in bed, feeling taller, her nightgown suddenly short on her legs. Her golden braids, which used to reach her shoulders, now fell past her chest. When she looked at her reflection in the polished surface of her dresser, a young lady with a more defined face and longer limbs gazed back. Her eyes, still wide with 8-year-old wonder, now looked out from a body that was clearly much older. Soon, cries of surprise and confusion began to ripple through Oakhaven. Not just Thomas and Emily, but every single child in the village had changed. Little Lily, the milk girl, was no longer little. The baker's twin boys, who were 6, now looked like they were 12. All the children, from the toddlers to those just on the cusp of being teenagers, had aged overnight. They were still themselves inside, but their outsides had transformed, making them look much older, like teenagers. The magical fog had left a truly astonishing mystery in its wake. The initial shock quickly turned into a wave of confusion and fear for the children of Oakhaven. Thomas tried to pull on his favorite blue trousers, but they stopped halfway up his shins, the waist far too tight. His small shirt felt like a stretched-out rag on his now broader chest. When he tried to call for his mother, a surprisingly deep, crackling sound came out, startling him. "Mum?" He tried again, but it was not his own voice. It sounded like an older boy, one he didn't know. Emily, looking at her familiar dress, realized it wouldn't even fit over her shoulders. Her shoes, once a perfect fit, were now far too small, pinching her toes uncomfortably. She wanted to cry, but her voice also sounded different, a little deeper and more shaky than her usual sweet tone. She felt like she was trapped in someone else's body. All over the village, similar scenes unfolded. Little Lily, who usually wore a cheerful yellow frock, found it was now like a tiny tunic. Her voice, once a tiny squeak, now had a surprising lower sound when she called for her parents. The Baker's twins, normally bouncy and full of laughter, stood bewildered in their bedrooms, their small shirts barely covering their bellies. The children gathered slowly in the village square, drawn by the sound of worried murmurs and strange new voices. They stared at each other, their 8-year-old minds struggling to understand what had happened. They recognized their friends' faces, but they were different now, older, with longer noses and sharper chins. They were used to being small, to running and tumbling without a care. Now, their limbs felt long and clumsy. Their old clothes lay in heaps, useless. Their voices, once so familiar, were strangers in their own throats. A wave of sadness washed over them. They were scared, and a deep longing for their familiar little selves began to settle in their hearts. The confusion and fear weren't limited to the children. The parents of Oakhaven were gripped by an even deeper, more heartbreaking shock. Thomas's mother, usually so calm, gasped when she saw her son. "Thomas, is that truly you?" she cried, her voice trembling. She reached out, touching his face, looking for the familiar dimples of her 8-year-old boy, but found only the sharper lines of a teenager. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized her little boy was gone, replaced by someone who looked much older. Emily's parents were equally distraught. Her father, a strong man who rarely showed fear, held his daughter at arm's length, his brow furrowed with worry. "My little Emily," he murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. Her mother knelt, trying to comfort Emily, but even her touch felt strange, as if she were comforting a young woman, not her tiny girl. The sight of Emily's golden braids, now long and heavy, made her mother weep. All across Oakhaven, parents rushed to their children, their morning chores forgotten. Mrs. Gable dropped a tray of freshly baked muffins when her twin boys, suddenly much taller, shuffled into her bakery. Old Mr. Abernathy, usually so steady, dropped a half-carved bird, as little Lily, now a young lady, tried to hand him his morning milk. There were cries of alarm, shouts of confusion, and the sound of parents trying desperately to understand. They hugged their transformed children tightly, searching for any sign of the little ones they had tucked into bed just hours before. They saw the same eyes, the same spark of personality. But the bodies were all wrong. Their children had grown up overnight, without warning, without explanation. The parents were filled with a terrible worry, a heavy weight in their chests. What had happened? How could this be? And most importantly, Would their beloved little ones ever be little again? The mystery of the shimmery fog had left them with an unbearable burden of not knowing. With the entire village in a state of bewilderment, the community knew they needed help. Someone suggested sending for Dr. Finch, a kind old doctor from the larger town of Westerly, just a few hours' ride away. He was known for his calm manner and his clever mind. A rider was quickly dispatched, and by mid-afternoon, Dr. Finch's modest buggy clattered into Oakhaven. Dr. Finch was a small man with spectacles perched on his nose and a kindly, wrinkled face. He listened patiently to the outpouring of stories from the distraught parents, his eyes wide with concern. He then asked to see the children. One by one, Thomas, Emily, Lily, and the others presented themselves. They stood awkwardly, still getting used to their new height and bodies, dressed in hastily borrowed, ill-fitting adult clothes. The doctor examined each child carefully. He felt their pulses, listened to their hearts with his stethoscope, and peered into their eyes. He asked them questions, gentle questions about how they felt. The children, despite their changed appearances, answered with the voices and thoughts of their true ages. Thomas spoke of missing his toy soldier, and Emily wished she could still fit into her favorite doll's dress. After a long hour, Dr. Finch sighed, removing his spectacles and rubbing his tired eyes. He turned to the waiting parents, his expression thoughtful. "I have examined every child, from young Master Thomas to little Miss Lily," he announced, his voice soft but clear. "And what I find is extraordinary. There is no fever, no rash, no sign of illness of any kind." A flicker of hope ran through the crowd, quickly replaced by confusion. "Then what is it, Doctor?" Emily's mother asked, her voice tight with worry. Dr. Finch shook his head slowly. "They are perfectly healthy. They simply appear to have aged. Every bone, every muscle, every strand of hair has matured as if years have passed overnight. I find no sickness, only age." He paused, looking at the parents with a deeply sympathetic gaze. It is as if time itself played a trick on Oakhaven. The answer brought no comfort, only deepened the mystery and the heavy worry in the parents' hearts. After Dr. Finch's puzzling pronouncement, a quiet sadness settled over Oakhaven. The children, still feeling like 8-year-olds inside their grown-up bodies, tried to go about their day. Thomas and Emily, wearing clothes borrowed from their older siblings or parents that were still a bit too big, decided to play hide-and-seek. It was their favorite game, after all. "You're it, Thomas," Emily's voice, now deeper, called out. Thomas covered his face against the old oak tree, but it felt different. His hands were too big to cover his eyes completely, and his long legs felt awkward as he leaned against the trunk. He counted to 20, his new voice echoing strangely. When he opened his eyes, he scanned the familiar spots. Emily was hiding behind Mrs. Gable's flour barrels, but she wasn't quite hidden. Her long legs stuck out from beneath the blooms, and her taller frame was easily visible. "Found you, Emily," Thomas called, but the usual thrill wasn't there. Emily emerged, a little frown on her older-looking face. "It's not as fun," she admitted. "I can't squeeze into my best hiding spots anymore." They tried to play tag, but their longer limbs made them clumsy. They stumbled and bumped into things, their movements feeling unfamiliar and unwieldy. Running through the fields, they felt less like nimble young children and more like adults trying to mimic child's play. The laughter that usually filled their games was replaced by sighs and quiet murmurs. Later, they sat by the river, watching the water flow. "I miss being little," Thomas said, kicking at a pebble with his now bigger foot. "I miss my small hands and my small voice." Emily nodded, her eyes distant. Me too. I miss being able to fit into my doll's clothes and pretend I was a fairy. It all feels strange now, like we're wearing costumes that are too big for our real selves. The joy had gone out of their games, replaced by a deep longing for the simple, unburdened days of being small. The strangeness of their aged bodies was one thing, but a new, more unsettling sadness began to creep into the children's hearts. As Thomas and Emily sat by the river, trying to remember what they used to do, a new problem arose. "Remember that time we tried to catch fireflies in a jar by the old mill?" Emily asked, trying to sound cheerful. Thomas frowned, concentrating hard. I think so. There were lots of little lights, right?" He could see a blurry picture in his mind, but the details, the feeling of the warm summer night, the giggles, felt distant, like a dream that was fading. "And my birthday party last year," Thomas began. "You got me that wooden boat, Emily. I sailed it in the big puddle after the rain." Emily tried to recall it, but it was like looking through a foggy window. She knew he had a wooden boat, and she knew she gave it to him, but the bright, clear memory of the day, the taste of the cake, the sound of their shared laughter, it was all fuzzy. "I remember the boat," she said, her voice quiet. "But the party, it's not very clear." A wave of fear washed over them. It wasn't just their bodies that had changed. It felt like their memories were shifting too, becoming less sharp, less real. Their childhood, all the precious moments of being 8 years old, seemed to be slipping away like grains of sand through their fingers. They tried to talk about their games, their secret hiding spots, the silly songs they made up. But each memory they tried to grab onto felt a little more out of reach. "It's like someone is slowly erasing our past," Thomas whispered, a tear rolling down his older-looking cheek. Emily reached for his hand, her own feeling too large and unfamiliar. "I don't want to forget being little," she said, her voice trembling. "It's the only us we know." The thought of losing their treasured memories, of forgetting who they truly were, was more frightening than any monster in a storybook. It made them feel truly lost. The worry over their children's fading memories spurred the adults of Oakhaven into action. Dr. Finch might not have found a medical reason, but the villagers were determined to find answers. They knew the strange, shimmery fog was the cause, but what exactly was it? And why had it done this? Gathering in the village square, the adults began to talk, trying to piece together any small detail. "Did anyone see anything truly odd when the fog rolled in?" Farmer McGregor asked, his booming voice softer with concern. Mrs. Gable wrung her apron. "It glowed, didn't it? Like 1,000 tiny fireflies dancing. I've never seen anything like it." Old Mr. Abernathy stroked his white beard. "It felt warm, not cold like a usual mist, and it shimmered, yes, a silver sparkle." They went from house to house, asking everyone, even those who usually kept to themselves. Did the fog smell like anything? Did it make any sounds? Did anyone see where it came from, or where it went? They talked to the shepherd who was out late with his flock, to the miller who often worked through the night, and to the few travelers who had passed through Oakhaven just before the strange event. One young man, who had been fishing by the river, remembered seeing a faint, almost invisible rainbow in the mist for a fleeting moment. Another woman, looking out her window, thought she saw the fog swirl into the shape of a giant bird before it settled. These were small details, perhaps just tricks of the light, but the villagers clung to them, hoping they were clues. They even walked the path leading out of the village, searching for any unusual marks on the ground, or strange plants that might have appeared. They examined the old oak tree, wondering if it held any secrets. Every leaf, every stone, every whisper of wind was scrutinized. They knew their children's happiness, and perhaps even their memories, depended on finding out what this magical fog truly was. The entire village became a team of detectives, searching for any tiny piece of the puzzle. The search for clues continued, but the answers were hidden, elusive as smoke. Just as hope began to dim, Mrs. Gable, the baker with the kindest heart, suddenly remembered something. "Wait," she said, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "My grandmother, bless her soul, used to tell stories. Very old stories. She led a small group of villagers to the cottage of Ilara, the oldest woman in Oakhaven. Ilara was nearly 90, her skin as wrinkled as a dried apple, and her eyes, though faded, held a deep, ancient wisdom. She spent most of her days knitting by the fire, her mind a treasure chest of old tales and forgotten lore. "Ilara, do you remember any stories about a strange fog?" Mrs. Gable asked gently, explaining what had happened to the children. Ilara slowly nodded, her knitting needles resting in her lap. "A fog, you say? Shimmery, like starlight." Her voice was soft, like rustling leaves. "Yes, I remember a tale my great-grandmother told me, passed down through the generations. It was about a whispering veil, they called it." The villagers leaned closer, hanging on her every word. Ilara paused, taking a sip of her tea, her mind traveling back in time. "It was many, many years ago, before even my great-grandmother was a little girl. A mist came to a village, much like ours. It was said to glow with a soft light, just as you describe." "And what did it do?" Thomas's father asked, his voice urgent. Ilara's eyes twinkled. "It changed things," they said. "Made the flowers bloom out of season, made the river flow backwards for a day. And yes," she looked directly at the worried parents, "it made the children grow overnight." A collective gasp went through the room. This was it. A connection, a glimmer of understanding. The tale confirmed their deepest fears, but also offered a thread of hope. Ilara's memory, old and fragile, was the first real clue they had found. The villagers held their breath, waiting for Ilara to continue her tale. Thomas's mother clutched her hands, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and a fragile hope. "But Ilara," she asked softly, "what happened after the children grew? Did they stay that way?" Ilara nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the flickering fire. "The story says the whispering veil, for all its magic, was never meant to change things forever. It was a fleeting fancy, a trick of the world." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the anxious faces in the room. "The tale tells that the mist changes things for a short time, like a dream that passes with the morning light, and then, usually, it changes them back." A wave of murmurs, a mix of relief and renewed worry, spread through the room. "Usually?" Farmer McGregor repeated, the single word hanging in the air. "Yes, usually," Ilara confirmed, her voice growing a little stronger. "The old ones believed the veil played its tricks, then retreated, leaving things as they were. The river flowed the right way again. The flowers went back to their normal seasons, and the children became little once more." Emily's father let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "So there's a chance our children could return to us." Ilara smiled faintly. "The story speaks of patience. It speaks of holding on to what is true. The magic of the veil is powerful, but it is also fickle. It does not last." She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering. My great-grandmother said that the villagers who saw it before, they simply waited. They kept their hope, and they kept their children's spirits bright. This was the most hopeful news Oakhaven had received since the fog arrived. It wasn't a promise, but it was a possibility. The mist was not a curse, but a temporary change. The villagers now had a direction, a reason to believe that their little ones, Thomas and Emily and all the others, might not be lost to them forever. They just needed to understand how to wait and what to wait for. With the tiny spark of hope from Ilara's story, the children of Oakhaven tried a new approach to their predicament. If their memories were fading, they would fight to keep them. Thomas and Emily sat together, trying to remember everything they could about their little selves. "What was our favorite game before hide-and-seek?" Emily asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut. I think it was follow the leader through Farmer McGregor's apple orchard. Remember how we used to pretend the trees were giants?" A faint image flickered in his mind, but it was still hazy. "And we used to sing that song about the sleepy bumblebee." "Oh, yes," Emily brightened. It went, "Sleepy, sleepy bumblebee, buzzing softly, 1, 2, 3. She started to hum, her deeper voice making the familiar tune sound strange. Thomas joined in, their voices a little off-key but filled with a new determination. They tried to remember the words to other songs, the silly rhymes they'd made up, and the secret handshake they shared. They talked about the time Thomas fell into the duck pond, and Emily helped him sneak back into his house without his mother noticing. They recalled building a giant fort out of blankets and chairs, and the taste of Mrs. Gable's gingerbread cookies fresh from the oven. It was hard work. Sometimes a memory would feel so close, only to slip away like water. Other times they would remember a piece, but the rest of the story was missing. The younger children in the village, who had aged from toddlers to older children, struggled even more. Their memories were even fewer and fainter. Their parents, seeing them try so hard, joined in. They would share stories from when the children were even smaller. "Remember when you tried to feed the cat your mashed peas, Thomas?" his mother would say, trying to bring a smile to his older-looking face. These shared memories, though not always fully recalled by the children, felt like warm blankets wrapping around their fading pasts, helping them hold on. Remembering old songs and games was helping, but Thomas and Emily felt they needed more. They needed to see their little selves, to truly hold onto the image of who they were. One afternoon, while trying to recall the exact shade of blue of Thomas's favorite small shirt, an idea sparked in Emily's mind. "What if we draw ourselves?" she suggested, her eyes brightening. "Not how we look now, but how we looked before. Maybe it will help us remember better." Thomas thought this was a wonderful idea. They found some paper and pencils from Emily's house, which, like most things, now felt too small in their larger hands. They sat at a small table, their grown-up bodies hunched over the tiny sheets. Thomas started first. He tried to draw his old unruly brown hair, shorter and messier. He remembered his bright, mischievous eyes, and the gap between his two front teeth. His larger hands, usually so good at drawing maps for their adventures, felt clumsy trying to capture the small, familiar details of his younger face. He drew his scraped knees and his favorite, slightly too big boots. Emily focused on her golden braids, trying to remember how they used to bounce when she ran. She drew her round, cheerful face and the little dimple that appeared when she smiled. She added her favorite dress, the yellow one with tiny embroidered flowers, and her small, nimble feet. It was hard work. Sometimes a line would go wrong, making their drawn selves look too old or not quite right. They would sigh and try again. As they drew, memories would sometimes pop into their heads, clearer than before. Thomas remembered the exact squeak his boots made, and Emily recalled the feel of the tiny flowers on her dress. Other children in the village saw what Thomas and Emily were doing and wanted to try too. Soon, many of the older-looking children were gathered, hunched over paper, carefully drawing pictures of their lost younger selves. Each drawing was a small act of defiance against the fading memories, a way to hold on to the little children they knew they still were inside. The children's efforts to remember and the parents' deep desire to help them sparked a new idea in the heart of Oakhaven. After seeing the children drawing their little selves and hearing Ilara's words about keeping spirits bright, Mrs. Gable suggested something truly special. "We must not let their memories fade," she declared to a gathering of villagers, "and we must not let our hope dim. What if we have a memory day?" Everyone looked at her, curious. "A day," she explained, her voice full of warmth, "when every person in Oakhaven shares a happy memory of one of our children. We will tell stories, sing their favorite songs, and look at their drawings. We will remind them and ourselves of all the joy they have brought us as little ones." The idea spread like wildfire. The villagers loved it. It was a way to fight the strangeness, to fill the air with happiness instead of worry. They chose the next sunny afternoon for Memory Day. Preparations began with joyful purpose. Mrs. Gable baked extra gingerbread cookies, the kind the children loved. Farmer McGregor polished his old fiddle, ready to play lively tunes. Old Mr. Abernathy crafted small, soft wooden animals for the younger children to hold, remembering their tiny hands. Parents practiced their favorite stories, polishing every detail. The time Thomas tried to teach a squirrel to read, or Emily insisted on wearing her flower crown to bed. They dug out old toys and tiny shoes, little treasures that held so many memories. The children themselves, seeing the bustling activity and feeling the warm spirit of the village, felt a little less lost. Thomas and Emily helped decorate the village square with colorful ribbons, their borrowed adult clothes feeling a bit less awkward as they worked. Memory Day was not just for the children. It was for the whole village, a way to hold on to the precious past and to keep hope alive for the future. The sun shone brightly on Memory Day, as if the sky itself was smiling upon Oakhaven. The village square was abuzz with activity, decorated with colorful ribbons and the children's drawings of their younger selves, pinned to makeshift boards. The air was filled with the sweet smell of Mrs. Gable's gingerbread and the cheerful sounds of Farmer McGregor's fiddle. The children, looking like teenagers but feeling like little ones, sat together on blankets. At first, they were a little shy, their new voices still feeling unfamiliar. But then, Mrs. Gable stepped forward, holding a tiny, worn wooden horse. "Thomas," she began, her eyes twinkling, "do you remember this little fellow? You called him Galloper. You would spend hours making him jump over tiny fences I made from leftover dough. And once, you tried to feed him a carrot, even though he was just wood." Thomas, who looked like a tall boy now, suddenly remembered. He pictured his small hands carefully guiding Galloper. A genuine laugh, a deep, full laugh that sounded just like a young boy's, burst from him. It was the first true laugh he had let out since the fog. Next, Emily's mother spoke, telling of a time Emily wore her flower crown so often it started to wilt. Emily giggled, a warm feeling spreading through her chest as she remembered the sweet smell of those flowers. Each villager took a turn, sharing a funny story or a tender memory. They sang the children's favorite nursery rhymes, their deep adult voices trying to mimic the high, sweet tones of children. Old Mr. Abernathy showed a small, half-finished bird he'd carved for Lily before the change, and described how she used to dance with glee whenever she saw him working. As the day went on, something magical happened. The children began to relax. They still looked like teenagers, but as they heard the stories, as they sang the songs, as they saw the love in their parents' eyes, they started to feel more like themselves. Their laughter rang out freely, and their eyes, though in older faces, shone with the pure, innocent joy of being little. They were remembering, truly remembering, and for the first time since the fog, they felt a sense of peace. As Memory Day drew to a close, a soft, golden light spread across the Oakhaven sky. The laughter of the children, now feeling lighter and happier, mingled with the gentle chatter of the adults. The air was filled with a sense of peace and hope that hadn't been felt in days. Thomas and Emily, their hands clasped, watched the sun dip below the hills, casting long shadows across the familiar village square. Then, just as the last sliver of sun vanished, a hushed whisper went through the crowd. "Look," someone pointed. From the direction of the river, where the first mysterious fog had appeared, another mist was slowly rising, but this one was different from the first, which had been so startling and bright. This mist was softer, gentler, its shimmer a faint, warm silver, rather than a dazzling glow. It drifted lazily like a sleepy cloud, curling around the edges of the cottages. It didn't feel threatening, like the previous one. Instead, it felt comforting, like a warm blanket settling over the village. The villagers watched, holding their breath, but this time there was more wonder than fear in their eyes. Ilara's story had prepared them. The children, too, watched with wide eyes, no longer scared. Thomas felt a strange, light tingle on his skin as the gentle mist drifted past him, like 1,000 tiny butterfly kisses. Emily felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling of peaceful sleepiness. The soft, shimmery fog slowly enveloped the entire village, wrapping around every house, every tree, every person. It was as if Oakhaven was being tucked into a magical, shimmering bed for the night. The light from the gas lamps seemed to glow even softer through the haze, casting a dreamlike spell. As the mist settled, a profound quiet descended, a silence that felt heavy with magic and expectation. Everyone went to bed that night with a new kind of hope in their hearts, wondering what the morning would bring. The morning after Memory Day dawned clear and bright, the gentle, shimmery mist having completely vanished with the night. A sense of quiet anticipation filled the air. Parents woke early, their hearts fluttering with a mix of hope and fear. Thomas stirred in his bed. He stretched out an arm, and this time it felt shorter. His pajamas, which had been tight yesterday, now felt loose and baggy. He sat up quickly, his heart thumping. He looked down at his hands. They were smaller, familiar. He rushed to his mirror, his breath catching in his throat. Staring back at him was his own reflection, the 8-year-old boy with the unruly brown hair and sparkling, mischievous eyes. His voice, when he let out a squeak of pure joy, was his own high-pitched, happy sound. "Mum! Dad!" he yelled, his little voice echoing through the cottage. "I'm little again." At the same moment, Emily woke up with a start. Her nightgown, which had been too short, now pooled around her small body. She scrambled out of bed and rushed to her dresser mirror. There she was, her own 8-year-old face, with her golden braids falling perfectly to her shoulders. Her giggle, when it bubbled up, was like tiny bells. All over Oakhaven, the same wonderful miracle was happening. Little Lily, the milk girl, was tiny again, her yellow frock now fitting perfectly. The baker's twin boys, who had looked like teenagers, were back to their bouncy 6-year-old selves, their small shirts now just right. The cries of surprise that filled the village this morning were not of fear, but of pure, overflowing happiness. Parents rushed into their children's rooms, tears of joy streaming down their faces as they embraced their little ones. They hugged them tightly, feeling their small arms, hearing their sweet, familiar voices. The children were back. The magical mist had kept its promise, and Oakhaven was filled with the most wonderful, joyous noise it had ever heard. The nightmare was over, and their beloved children were finally home in their own little bodies. The joy that filled Oakhaven was nowhere stronger than in the homes of Thomas and Emily. When Thomas's mother rushed into his room, her eyes wet with happy tears, he didn't hesitate. He launched himself into her arms, his small body feeling so right against hers. "Mum," he cried, his voice no longer deep and strange, but his own familiar childish treble. He squeezed her tightly, burying his face in her shoulder, feeling completely safe and utterly happy. His father joined the hug, wrapping his big arms around both of them. "My boy," he murmured, his voice thick with relief. Thomas felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of being truly home again. He was so glad to be little. Emily, too, was overjoyed. When her parents came running, their faces beaming, she ran to them, her golden braids bouncing with every step. She hugged her mother's waist, then her father's leg, her small hands holding on as tight as they could. "I'm me again," she exclaimed, her giggle like the sweetest music. Her mother knelt, pulling Emily into a gentle embrace, stroking her hair. "Yes, my darling, you are you again, our sweet little Emily." Her father ruffled her hair, a wide, relieved smile on his face. Emily felt a happiness so big it made her want to sing and dance. The fear of their fading memories, the awkwardness of their grown-up bodies, the strange sound of their changed voices, all of it melted away in the warmth of their parents' hugs. Thomas and Emily looked at each other from across their parents' arms, their eyes sparkling with shared understanding and pure delight. They were little again, and it was the best feeling in the world. They clung to their parents, as if they could never let go, grateful for every tiny part of their familiar young selves. The news that the children were little again spread like joyful wildfire through Oakhaven. The village, which had been so quiet with worry, now buzzed with excitement and happiness. There was only one thing to do: celebrate. "A feast!" cried Farmer McGregor, his booming voice back to its cheerful rumble. "A grand feast for our children." Mrs. Gable immediately began planning the biggest, most delicious meal Oakhaven had ever seen. She baked dozens of her special gingerbread cookies, not just the children's favorite, but enough for everyone. She made apple tarts, berry pies, and loaves of fresh, crusty bread. Other villagers brought roasted chickens, pots of steaming vegetable stew, and bowls of creamy potato salad. Tables were set up in the village square, draped with white cloths and decorated with wildflowers. Farmer McGregor brought out his fiddle, and other musicians joined him, playing lively tunes that made everyone tap their feet. The air was filled with music, laughter, and the wonderful smell of good food. The children, back in their proper-fitting clothes, ran and played with boundless energy, their small bodies feeling light and free once more. Thomas and Emily, hand in hand, chased each other around the old oak tree, their giggles ringing clear and true. Hide and seek was fun again. They could squeeze into all their secret spots, and their voices, when they called, "Ready or not," were perfectly high and childish. Parents watched their little ones with happy tears in their eyes, feeling immense relief and gratitude. They hugged their children often, just to make sure they were truly back. The fear and worry of the past few days seemed like a distant dream, replaced by the warmth of community and the joy of seeing their beloved children as they should be. It was a celebration of family, of home, and of the magic that had, against all odds, brought everything back to normal. The feast lasted late into the evening, a joyous expression of Oakhaven's happiness. After the wonderful feast, as the last stars twinkled in the Oakhaven sky, the children finally went to bed, their hearts full of joy. But something had changed in them, deeper than just their bodies returning to normal. They had experienced something extraordinary, and it had taught them a valuable lesson. Thomas and Emily especially looked at their childhood with new eyes. The next morning, as they ate breakfast, Thomas carefully held his small spoon. "Remember how big my hands felt yesterday?" he said to his mother, his eyes wide. "It was hard to even hold this." Emily nodded. "And my clothes were so huge. I couldn't even run properly." She thought about how much she missed her little dresses and her nimble feet. They had always loved being children, but before the fog, they had taken it for granted. Now, every game of hide-and-seek felt extra special. Every story their parents read felt like a precious gift. They no longer complained about little chores, and they cherished the simple joys of their days. When they played in the fields, they ran with even more glee, feeling the freedom of their small, quick bodies. Their laughter was brighter, their smiles wider. They appreciated being able to squeeze into small spaces, to climb trees with ease, and to have their high, clear voices. They understood now that being little was a special time, full of wonder and freedom that they had almost lost. They had seen what it was like to be older, to have bigger bodies and deeper voices, and while it had been scary, it had also shown them how precious their youth was. Thomas and Emily vowed to enjoy every single moment of their childhood, knowing how quickly it could change, and how truly special it was to be young. The magical days of the shimmering fog and the sudden aging of the children became a legendary tale in Oakhaven. It was a story told and retold, a reminder of the strange and wonderful things that can happen. And no one told the story better or more often than Thomas and Emily. As they grew up, truly this time, year by year, they never forgot the week they spent as teenagers. When new families moved into Oakhaven, or when they met children from other villages at the yearly fair, Thomas and Emily would gather them close. "Have I ever told you about the time I was a big boy?" Thomas would begin, his eyes twinkling with the memory. Emily would chime in, "And I was a tall girl, with braids down to here." She'd point to her chest, making the younger children gasp in amazement. They would describe the shimmery fog, how their clothes didn't fit, and the deep, strange sound of their voices. They'd talk about how clumsy they felt, trying to play their favorite games, and how scared they were when their memories started to fade. They always made sure to tell about the kind Dr. Finch, the wise Ilara, and the special memory day that brought their real selves back. The younger children would listen with wide eyes, sometimes giggling, sometimes looking a little bit scared. "You really looked like a grown-up," a little boy would ask Thomas, pulling at his sleeve. "Just like one," Thomas would say with a grin. "But inside, I was still only 8, just like you," Emily would add. "And we learned that being little is a very special thing, so don't wish it away too fast." Their story became a cherished part of Oakhaven's history, a magical adventure that taught everyone to appreciate the present moment. Thomas and Emily were the best storytellers, their vivid memories keeping the tale of the children who aged overnight alive for generations to come. Even after many years had passed, and the children who aged overnight grew up naturally into adults, the villagers of Oakhaven never forgot that strange week. The memory of the shimmery fog, and the day their children grew up too fast, became a part of their village's very fabric. When a new mist would rise from the river on a chilly morning, a few villagers would glance at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. It was never the same magical, shimmering kind of fog, but it was enough to make them remember. Parents would often look at their growing children, now truly becoming teenagers, and recall the fear they felt when their little ones changed overnight. They would hug them a little tighter, cherishing each passing year, knowing how quickly time could speed by. Mrs. Gable, when baking her gingerbread cookies, would sometimes hum the children's old songs, remembering the memory day that had brought so much hope. Old Mr. Abernathy, carving his wooden birds, would recall the older-looking Lily, trying to deliver milk with her strange, deeper voice. The experience had bonded the village in a unique way. They had faced a mystery together, a magical event that no one outside of Oakhaven would ever truly believe. It taught them patience, hope, and the power of shared memories. They became even closer, their community spirit strengthened by the strange event. The children, now young adults, carried the story not as a scary memory, but as a special secret, a reminder of the magic hidden in the world and the importance of every stage of life. The strange fog, and the day their children grew up too fast, would forever be a part of Oakhaven's history, a tale whispered from one generation to the next. Through all the years that followed, Thomas and Emily remained the very best of friends. Their bond, already strong, had been made even stronger by the strange week they shared. They had faced confusion and fear together, and celebrated their return to childhood side by side. They continued to play hide-and-seek, their laughter echoing through the village as they found perfect hiding spots and chased each other through the fields. But now, there was a new sparkle in their eyes, a deeper joy in their games. Every sunny afternoon spent by the river, every shared secret under the old oak tree, felt more precious. They didn't just play. They truly cherished every moment of being young. They listened more closely to their parents' stories, knowing how easily memories could blur. They looked at the world with a sense of wonder, remembering that magic could appear in the most unexpected ways. Thomas still had his unruly brown hair, and Emily's golden braids still bounced when she ran. Their scraped knees were badges of honor from adventures, and their smiles were as bright as ever. They often reminded each other, "Remember when we couldn't fit into our clothes?" Or, "Remember how strange our voices sounded?" These shared memories were like a special treasure only they possessed. Their friendship was a constant, a warm, bright light in Oakhaven. They grew up side by side, sharing every joy and every small sadness, always with the understanding that being young was a gift to be treasured. They knew that childhood was a fleeting, magical time, and they were determined to live it to the fullest, appreciating every single day of their youthful adventure. And so, life in Oakhaven returned to its gentle, familiar rhythm. The fields grew green, the river flowed, and the bakery always smelled of fresh bread. But the village was not quite the same. It was a place touched by magic, a place where a strange, shimmery fog had visited and left behind a memory that would last forever. The children, especially Thomas and Emily, grew up with full hearts, remembering the lesson they learned about cherishing their youth. They ran and played with an extra spark, their laughter echoing through the lanes, a joyful sound that reminded everyone of the happiness that had returned. The parents, too, carried a quiet gratitude in their hearts. They watched their children grow, truly and slowly this time, appreciating every scraped knee, every silly question, and every bedtime story. The fear had passed, leaving behind a deeper love and a stronger bond within each family and across the entire village. Oakhaven remained a small, quiet place, but it was now rich with a unique story. The tale of the children who aged overnight became a favorite, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren. It was a story that reminded them that even in the most ordinary of places, extraordinary things can happen. It taught them to be brave when things are strange, to hold on to hope, and to value the simple, wonderful gift of each day. The village lived on, happy and peaceful, always carrying the magical memory of the week when time played a trick, and the children of Oakhaven learned just how special it was to be young. And sometimes, on a quiet evening, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the faint, happy echoes of Thomas and Emily's laughter, a timeless sound in a village that remembered its magic.